Now, before you run to the comments to complain that I'm making another video griping about Rey or The Last Jedi, let me quickly say that the idea I want to talk about or present here is something I think, or at least hope, that those who both love and hate the character of Rey would potentially appreciate, and something that perhaps could even help Disney and Lucasfilm win back at least some of the fans it has lost as of late. Because, honestly, I really do want to try to start to move past some of the negativity I've been projecting of late and look for solutions on how to help heal the fanbase, assuming that's even possible at this point, and, of course, keeping in mind, no one at Disney and Lucasfilm are ever going to actually listen to anything I have to say, much less heed my advice. Because, and this is baffling to me, they seem either oblivious to the fact, or like they just don't care that they have a problem on their hands, and that they have lost a lot of their most dedicated fans, and then essentially told those fans they just have to deal with the way Star Wars is now, instead of in any way, shape, or form addressing their issues. And though I don't claim to be a business expert, I don't have to be one to know it's counterproductive for a business that, at the end of the day, is motivated by making money, to tell people who have loved this franchise their whole lives in some cases, and spent perhaps thousands upon thousands of dollars on merchandise over the years that, basically, maybe Star Wars just isn't for you anymore, and we're going to try a different approach and appeal to a different crowd. Or as J.J. Abrams recently did, say something that offends a good deal of your fan base when you say, fans are threatened by women if they have any problems with the female characters in these new movies. And if I had the chance, I would ask J.J. Abrams how you explain someone like me, someone who has issues with Rey, yet fully believes that Ahsoka, another female character, is one of the best, most well-developed, not to mention likable characters in all of Star Wars. How exactly do you explain the male fans that love Ahsoka and beg for more and more of her, yet have issues with Rey? Are we only threatened by certain female characters, like, I don't know, poorly written ones? And yes, I know, I said I wasn't going to be negative here, but remarks like the ones JJ gave are at the core of the problem. This disconnect between fans and Lucasfilm and Disney about just what people don't like about the sequel trilogy is the problem. Or maybe I should say the problem is them telling us why some of us don't like these movies, and insulting us in the process by basically calling us sexist. And to be fair, I don't know just how many fans are disgruntled by these new movies and how many are walking away from the franchise. Again, in some cases after a lifetime of loving it. I don't know what the percentage of people who liked The Last Jedi is compared to those who didn't like it. I just know there is a good number of fans out there who genuinely hate these new movies, and The Last Jedi in particular, and are all but done with Star Wars forever. And again, this baffles me. The response from Disney and Lucasfilm has basically just been to wave goodbye to these fans, tell them they're wrong, and defend these movies at all costs, rather than even begin to admit that maybe there's been some issues or problems with them. And to touch on what I feel like one of the biggest problems has been, not just for the character of Rey, but the sequel trilogy in general, has been the length of time that has gone by within the story after 2 movies now. What do I mean by that? Well, when you really think about it, The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi are almost 2 parts of the same movie, and granted, they may not feel that way in some respects, like tone for example, but when you consider the fact that one picks up immediately where the other left off, which is actually quite rare with sequels, and that in total maybe 3 or 4 days have gone by from the start of The Force Awakens to the end of The Last Jedi, well, that hasn't left much time for change or growth, not only for the characters, but also the story itself. For example, there is a 3-year gap between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, and even though nowhere within the movie itself are we ever told exactly how much time has gone by, just the fact that the rebels have built a new base on Hoth lets us know the story is picking up somewhere down the road from the events of A New Hope, and that, obviously, many other things have happened not just to these characters, but in the galaxy itself. And thus begins to explain why these characters from the first movie we saw have evolved or changed in some respects, even if the movie never goes too great into detail about what events have transpired to cause these changes. We can just safely assume they've had other adventures because, of course, there was time for such adventures. And when Han mentions to Leia that the bounty hunter they ran into on Ord Mantell changed his mind about staying with the rebels, we even have these other adventures hinted at. The problem with the characters in The Force Awakens, however, and I'll use Rey in particular, is one day she is sitting alone on Jakku just trying to survive, then apparently the Force awakens in her, and 3 days later she's confronting Snoke, perhaps the most powerful Force user we've ever seen. And granted, she wasn't on par with Snoke, but she easily defeated what I assume to be his elite trained guards before escaping Kylo Ren after flat out beating him in the first movie just a day or two ago. And then shortly thereafter, she's lifting a huge mound of boulders to save the Resistance. And again, 3 days earlier, she'd been barely surviving alone on Jakku, thinking Luke Skywalker and the Jedi to be a myth. And now she's almost as powerful as any Jedi we've ever seen before. Compare that to Luke, who, after some training from Obi-Wan, and 3 years to go out and have adventures while he sought knowledge to learn a bit more about the Force on his own, could barely pull a lightsaber out of the snow to save his life when a Wampa was about to attack him. Anyway, one way the character of Rey could have been saved in the eyes of fans who had an issue with her in The Force Awakens and called her a Mary Sue, and also a way that would have almost certainly turned her into a character most Star Wars fans loved, was to simply have her train under Luke for some extended period of time in The Last Jedi and give us all an explanation for the things she had done in The Force Awakens. That's literally it. All they had to do, and most people would have been fine with her character and the things she would henceforth be able to do. I honestly and 100% believe saving Rey, again for the fans that didn't like her, after The Force Awakens was really that damn easy. That, however, is not what they did. Instead, they had her kinda train with Luke for a few hours, and in that short time he mainly tries to convince her the Jedi need to end, and as crazy as it sounds, the girl who 3 days ago thought Luke Skywalker was a myth and questioned if the Jedi were even real, steals ancient Jedi books because somehow she already has more faith and belief in the Jedi than Luke Skywalker does. This Disney and Lucasfilm is why people don't like Rey. Not because she's a female character, but because she basically showed up Luke and made him seem like a bitter old fool. And for a moment, close your eyes and envision how ridiculous The Empire Strikes Back would be if Luke had done anything similar like that to Master Yoda. Anyway, flat out what I think the biggest mistake they made with The Last Jedi was the decision to pick up right where The Force Awakens left off. Even though we all wanted to see what happened next, we all wanted to know what happened after Rey handed the lightsaber to Luke at the end of The Force Awakens, and would have felt robbed or cheated had we not seen that encounter. However, if I'd known all Rian Johnson was going to do with that moment was simply have Luke toss the saber over his shoulder and be a cranky old man who wanted to die, I would have told them at Lucasfilm to just forget it. Keep what happened in that fateful moment forever shrouded in mystery, and have The Last Jedi take place at least a few months after the end of The Force Awakens. Hell, they could have still somewhat kept this idea intact that Luke wanted the Jedi to end and refused to train Rey, but a stubborn Rey, feeling a strange connection to the island and the first Jedi Temple, decided to stay and try to learn from the knowledge she discovers on the island, though she's not having an easy time with it at all. The start of the movie could have even been Rey finally sending Chewie and R2 away, telling them that they're needed more by the Resistance than by her on the island, and that she feels like she can't leave and wants to stay and continue to try and learn, even if Luke refuses to train her. This could have been the moment when Luke finally starts to believe she's committed enough to be a Jedi, and he starts to come around, and he even begins to interact with her and maybe to train her without her even realizing it. Which, yeah, sounds a little like the plot of The Karate Kid, but I think something along those lines could have really worked here. I personally would have been okay if Luke, through training Rey, would have started to come back and believe in the Jedi again because he believed in her. And if he believes in her, I'm going to be more naturally inclined to believe in her as well, and even like her character. Also, if he trains her, I'm also going to believe that Rey, having been trained by perhaps the greatest Jedi ever, would be able to move a mound of boulders by the end of the movie. Instead, they have her show up Luke, my all-time favorite character, who I've been waiting to see on screen again for 35 years. And surprisingly enough, that wasn't the best way to endear her to me and a whole lot of other people. But really, it all goes back to time. In the story Rian Johnson wanted to tell, one that picked up right where The Force Awakens left off, and in his defense, we all wanted it to pick up right there too, and ended with the climax we got on Crate, there just wasn't enough time for Luke to train Rey while still allowing the other characters to play a part and, of course, to get them all to Crate in any sort of believable way. The slow space chase and Finn and Rose's side adventure was the way it was simply because Rian Johnson needed those characters to kill some time before the Crate scene, which gave Rey at least some amount of time to interact with Luke before rushing off to save Kylo Ren after a day of Force Skyping with him. And thus, in the end, we got all the characters where we needed them to be for the climax of the movie. Thankfully, though, this shouldn't now be an issue for Episode 9 because it will almost certainly take place years after the end of The Last Jedi. And I say that because time will need to pass for the new rebellion to truly take shape and to be a threat to Kylo Ren's First Order. Another thing I think we can be pretty sure about is Rey either will be a Jedi already at the start of this next movie, or will become one sometime before the end of the movie. And if you think Rey is either going to lose in this next movie or maybe sacrifice herself to save Kylo Ren or the New Rebellion, well, I hate to say it, but I don't see any outcome of that sort coming to pass. Because there's just no way Rey loses. Unfortunately, the outcome of this whole trilogy will be limited or dictated by agendas outside of the movie, instead of what will make for the best ending of the Star Wars saga. And J.J. Abrams' recent comments about fans feeling threatened by female characters seems to back that up. So I honestly just can't see anything but a win for the character of Rey in the last movie. But here's the thing, Rey should win this last movie, and we should want her to as well. She is supposed to be the hero of this new trilogy, and it's not the character's fault she has been both written in a way that alienates many fans, and not given time over the course of 2 movies to grow and become accustomed to her force powers in a believable way. And the fact that I have so many issues with her character is probably the most disappointing aspect of this trilogy thus far, and I think a lot of other fans feel the same way. Because, believe it or not, Disney and Lucasfilm, I want to like this character, and I'm sure many others do as well. But you have to give me a reason to like her, to root for her, other than telling me if I don't like her, there's something wrong with me, not with your ability to create a great character. And now, Disney and Lucasfilm, here's where time can be on your side, because you have 2 years until Episode 9 comes out, 2 years to start to fix some of the damage you've done. And again, I know no one at Disney and Lucasfilm will ever hear this advice, but I'm going to say it anyway. First, and this will be hard for you guys, acknowledge the fact that maybe, just maybe, the people who have an issue with Rey and The Last Jedi are not just being sexist or hating for the sake of hating, but have legitimate gripes with the characters and some of the plot holes and problems with the story. Let go of this belief that you can change the world for the better with your agenda for Star Wars, and just let Star Wars be Star Wars. And please, start listening to your fans to some degree. And I'm not saying you can't subvert our expectations from time to time, or that I think the movie should be glorified fan fiction. But listen and respond to your fan base in a civilized manner, instead of telling us we're afraid of women or some other nonsense. I mean, if George Lucas can listen to the fans about Jar Jar Binks and greatly diminish his planned role in the prequel trilogy after many fans hated him in Episode 1, then you guys can acknowledge when at least a noticeable percentage of your customers tell you they have a problem with the product you're giving them. And my last piece of advice to you, Disney and Lucasfilm, is to use time to your advantage in another way and use the other sources of canon to begin to patch up this story and try to lure some fans back into the fold. For better or worse, J.J. Abrams has apparently finished the script for Episode 9, which means you can right now begin to build a story between 8 and 9. Again, keeping in mind, years are likely going to go by within the story for you to fill with something that begins to fix some of these problems. On one of my previous videos, Zach Hamilton left a comment with an idea I absolutely loved when he suggested creating some type of short animated series set between Episode 8 and 9, not unlike what they did with the Clone Wars micro-series that came out after Episode 2 and before Episode 3, which were actually really well done and really entertaining. Not to mention, connected to the movies and told a story that was pertinent to them. We even saw how Anakin went from Padawan to Jedi Knight in one of them. So why not do something like this for Rey? Why not create a short animated miniseries that comes out next fall, right before the movie, that shows some of the struggles Rey faces trying to train herself to be a Jedi with just those books? Why not, assuming her parents really are irrelevant to the story and won't play a part in 9, have her go track down what really happened to them, and along the way she discovers something about her past and perhaps the planet Jakku, which begins to explain her insanely strong connection to the Force. Elsewhere in the canon, in the Aftermath series to be exact, it was established there is a light side nexus at the center of Jakku. Why not actually use that idea that, as of right now, feels pointless? In fact, the whole Aftermath series, and almost everything else you've done with the canon in connection to the sequel trilogy, feels completely irrelevant. The book Bloodline, for example, was supposed to tie into Episode 8 somehow. It was even said Rian Johnson himself had given input, and as someone who's read that book and obviously seen The Last Jedi, I couldn't even begin to tell you what the connection is, other than the fact that the book does help begin to explain the origins of the First Order a little bit, which is something the movies have completely neglected. So why not do it differently this time? Why not really use the other sources of canon to create a great story between episodes 8 and 9 before 9 even comes out? I'm not saying you spoil the movie, but don't be afraid to expand on some of the things and build a bridge between these two movies that makes at least some of your fans who are becoming disinterested really excited for episode 9. And I know some of you out there are saying right now, well, I don't read the books, or I wouldn't watch an animated series, and the important parts of Rey's story should be explored within the movies. And I'll agree with you about that last part. The bulk, or at least the important parts, of Rey's story should be in the movies. But I don't feel like we've really learned anything about her or what her story is, and I can't see episode 9 having the time to really fix some of the issues people have with her. I also don't see it having the time to really show her facing and overcoming some real hardships in connection to her training to be a Jedi. Because, again, I pretty much fully expect Rey to already be a Jedi when episode 9 starts, without us getting much of an explanation as to how this happens because there just won't be time. And yes, even though a lot of people wouldn't read a book or watch the animated series, there are still a lot of people who would, and dare I say, even more that would watch YouTube videos explaining what we learned about in those stories. And I know I, at the very least, would appreciate the effort on Disney and Lucasfilm's part, and the acknowledgement that, again, just maybe, there's been some problems with the sequel trilogy. And honestly, if Disney and Lucasfilm continue to operate with this perceived we don't care about the fans attitude, and continue to place the blame on us for not liking a movie, well, then I have a bad feeling about the future of this franchise. Well, that's all I've got for you this time, and now I'm really curious to know what you think. Would a short animated series exploring the character of Rey a bit more, and maybe highlighting some of her struggles post-episode 8, be something you think would be appreciated by some of Rey's naysayers, and start to bring them around? Would it be something you yourself appreciated? Also, would Disney and Lucasfilm changing their stance a bit, and admitting that people who criticize these new Star Wars movies may have some valid points, help bring you back into the fold, assuming you're someone who's losing your faith in them in the first place? Let me know in the comments below and share any of your own ideas for maybe helping save the fractured fan base, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.